So the other day I was in my dungeon huffing some emulsion and I got visions. Rad visions. Visions of hijacked robots seemingly infected with a parasite of some sort. Visions of a sleek gorilla creature with retractable appendages connected directly to its shoulder blades. Unbeknownst to me, these were concepts for the swarm. That's right, all of these images are simply concepts for what could have been. The design for some of these enemies could have led to much more interesting gameplay and lore compared to what we got. After nearly a decade of the Coalition taking charge of this IP, none of these ideas ever came to fruition the way they were originally intended. The swarm can never and will never be as interesting as the Locust. You're first introduced to the Locust as this army of rocky mole men that has your planet's population on the ropes. They seem to be just as capable as humans, if not more so, and it's your duty to plant a resonator to map out their cave systems and take them out from the inside out. From the first game alone, you're put into so many encounters that leave you wondering. Of course you have your humanoids like the drones and their counterparts, but you also have smaller creatures like the tickers and the wretches that have little to no sense of familiarity. Beyond those two, it doesn't get any easier to understand. Around every corner there are creatures that look otherworldly, being protected by natural and manufactured armor. While they do start out as creatures of the hollow, you soon learn that they actually have a civilization underneath along with their own religion and hierarchy. The Locusts take prisoners, torture for information, plan strategically to get the upper hand, and aside from learning the origins of the Locust in Gears of War 2, you're really left in the dark with what they're capable of. An interesting aspect I see in Gears of War 2 are some offhand comments talking about where the Locusts come from or what they eat.
One thing I still don't understand. Have the Locusts been down here, like, forever, or what?
Who knows, man?
This one guy in Basic, he thought they were from Risea or one of the moons, and that they feed on emulsion.
Hey, Marcus, you ever seen them eating emulsion?
They can eat shit and die for all I care.
Reavers fly somehow. Barges turned from something that climbs on the ceiling to something that floats in the air. And Corpsers, fuck, I can't even begin to explain what this thing is. But this is just a small list of the Locusts that leave you with more questions than answers. Matter of fact, to this day, not everybody knows this, but none of the three enemies I just mentioned are even Locust. Enemies like the Wretch, the Bloodmount, and the Corpser aren't even Locust at all. They're just creatures deep underneath the surface, presumably native to the Inner Hollow. Every denizen of the Hollow was either genetically modified for war or evolved specifically for survival. Something like the Beast Barge could be understood as a native tamed species deep in the Hollow, but a gas barge had to have had some intervention to be able to fly like that. Truthfully, the capabilities of the Locust seemed to strengthen as time went on. It was impossible to know what would come next. The chokehold that the Locust had on the population was terrifying. The sinking of cities and constant tremors reminding you that the floor beneath you can crumble at any moment. As night fell, the skies were invaded by krill that ripped people to pieces within seconds, and with the population dwindling, even Locusts aren't entirely safe from that. The war left the world in turmoil, with people even choosing to live in smaller communities in toppled buildings and shoddy huts as stranded, rather than trusting the military forces to fight the Locusts. A dark sci-fi such as Gears of War needs a proper tone to match the everlasting chaos. There were multiple generations who knew nothing but war. Emulsion was exploited and fought over for 79 years, and within that time, it was able to spread sickness and destroy the planet's ecosystems. After only 6 weeks of silence, the Locusts were forced to the surface and ultimately started a three-way battle between the humans, Locust, and Lambent. 17 years later, all Locust and Lambent were presumed dead after the Emulsion countermeasure weapon was set off, leading to the time of peace and restoration. After 25 years, the Locusts are back, with their skin armored with impenetrable crystals, towering over soldiers, being much angrier. The Scions moved beyond rundown, outdated tech and evolved to be symbiotic through unknown means. Lacking in numbers, they used their new discovery to create a brand new army named the Swarm. It's a biological marvel with the sole purpose of ending humanity. So what now? On the surface, I don't particularly hate the Swarm. I think the brand new designs are interesting, and the lore, or lack thereof, leaves a lot of room for discovery and horrifying new creatures. In theory, the Swarm can be the genesis of a brand new onslaught of enemies that are stronger, faster, and are all connected through a Hivemind, which leads to more precise attacks. And for a while, that's what we get. normal infantry, slippery living mines, multiple needle shooting enemies, and a living tank with biological missiles being just a few of the newcomers to the series. They're all pretty awesome designs, with remnants of past Locusts being so obvious in their inspirations. If Scions can create brand new creatures, especially one so large that the cog needs the state-of-the-art real steel mech suits to take it out, the possibilities are limitless. Over time, the swarm causes more chaos and destruction and grows in numbers across the entire world. Now it goes beyond an invasion, and it can officially be called a war. As the swarm takes over facilities and cities, they leave hives in their wake. In just a few months, the swarm grows exponentially, and the creatures they create seem to stagnate. Only 4 months had passed from the prologue to the present in Gears 5, so obviously gigantic strides can't really be taken, but mechanically and biologically, the swarm are extremely different and have shown feats that would put the Locust to shame. The ability to shoot appendages and regrow them nearly instant, acid spit that sticks to whatever it touches, and the ability to completely hijack machinery. Those are crazy feats, but unfortunately the swarm's portrayal is weak. They're monsters with enormous heights, but they don't strike fear like the Locusts do. The Locusts were so inhuman. Not only did they create weaponry like the siege beasts and the diggers, they controlled every single area you can think of. Sky, land, caves, and sea. They enslaved their own kind and reproduced by force. The swarm can't compare. In Gears of War 4, the speaker gets his hand cut off and the Snatcher gets hit by a car. Comparing these two seems completely unfair. The Locust environment was very dark fantasy. There are decorated pillars illuminating the pathway stretching across the inner hollow that ultimately reach a palace. This demonstrates not only how unified the Locust can be, but it oozes with personality and leans into the fantasy side of Gears. The swarm haven't been around as long as the Locust, and the majority of the hollow is flooded, so they have to resort to abandoned facilities and the like. The areas they inhabit largely stay the exact same, aside from unknown tendrils covering anywhere from patches of the area to the entire room. Pods of organisms being transitioned into the swarm are also abundant in these areas, so they are practically birthplaces. While a palace symbolizes power and nobility, these tendrils can only really symbolize domination at best, however much you can dominate by conquering areas out of sight and uninhabitable. The first big bad of the series, General Rom, had a title that suggested that there was a military and or societal structure that the Locust formed. In fact, there are multiple rankings in their hierarchy, and as I've mentioned before, they have their own language and their own religion. The language being the Locust runes, and the religion being the Trinity of Worms. The drones who followed orders from their Uzil, Zamil, and Theron rose from the dead and simply never try to rebuild these systems from the past. Their first high-ranking swarm is a scion known as the Speaker. He speaks. He's killed within minutes of dropping that bombshell, and no other attempt at civilization is made. You may think I'm joking or being hyperbolic, but this is their wiki page talking about their culture and military tactics. It's not a lot. Most higher-ranking Locusts were either gifted or genetically modified. Rom and Karn are both drones, Rom being gifted, taller and stronger than most drones, and Karn literally being disabled. Scourge is just your basic Cantus. He just knows how to use a chainsaw staff like a madman. Even mounts like Scourge's Hydra and Karn's Shibboleth are just a mutated Reaver and Corpser respectively. These are not brand new creatures in a class of their own, they're just mutated or given special perks. Since the Scions seemingly have a direct connection to the creation of these new enemies, what is stopping them from making a mutated drone just to take the lead as general, since they're apparently so vehemently trying to regrow their civilization? All of the new ideas and mechanics could have been used to create some really impressive creatures that had the capabilities of the Locust, but entirely biological. The ability to hijack machines could have had way more possibilities, but we got a bumbling idiot, a passive shield, and a walking turret, which is actually really sick. The possibilities were endless, but the Coalition just sells themselves short every single time. The concept art for these guys was honestly so damn cool, and for some reason the Coalition scrapped every goddamn idea. But why does any of that matter? The Locust and Swarm are just enemies to shoot, and the stories are pretty straightforward. Why would the enemies need to have any work beyond that? Well, it's because other than lore reasons, adding different environments and showing the dichotomy of you and your enemy is interesting. Gears of War did a pretty big time skip and now has an abundance of resources for protection and civilization. The entire first half of Gears 4 has you in COG and outsider settlements, so having more of that just gets a bit boring. Gears 5 took a switch and showed us some UIR locations, but again, it's still just man-made locations. Exploring what the swarm can create on their own shows off their capabilities outside of walking forward and shooting, and adds a bit more mystery and wonder to your world. The Hollow made me wonder how complex the Locust society got, but the swarm just has locations, no sense of awe or wonder. The swarm are not as dangerous as the Locust, they don't have the same desperation or drive. Without desperation, we can never see the lengths they'll go to just to take over the surface.
So we know they're trying to sink Jacinto, but it sounds like it'll flood the Hollow. Why would they do that?
They're desperate. All this time, we never realized that. Jack, plug in and see what you can find.
The swarm need to be discreet, they need to be in and out of settlements as quickly as possible. They need to maximize their army growth while keeping it under wraps so the military does not notice. So they're kind of at a standstill with what they can do. They can't dig caves and make sinkholes underneath unsuspecting victims. They can't control the airspace and blot out the sun. They can't strategize and attack when the moment is right. From a video game perspective, this just limits the amount of enemies to fight and gives you less interesting situations to be a part of. The only thing that seems to pull you away from the main path are wind flares, and if not for that, you just run into the same few enemies over and over again. Hopefully in the next game we can get something more interesting that really pulls me into the swarm. But after nearly a decade with the IP, TC hasn't given us any info that would be interesting. According to the wiki, the swarm's physiology is truthfully fucking awesome. Canonically, the swarm tendrils that cover their hives are fungal-like, and the swarm themselves emit spores for means of communication. Instead of anything interesting with the swarm concept, it's stuck, and I don't believe it's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have any theories of your own on what the swarm could be, or if there was any information I got wrong or might have missed, feel free to leave that in the comments. And if you agree or disagree about my take on the swarm, feel free to let me know why you feel that way. And if Gears of War interests you, feel free to like and subscribe. I got more story content, horde content, and multiplayer content coming out pretty soon, and I don't want you guys to miss it.